In the shadows of forgotten archives, where dust clings to sealed files and the ink of vanished orders still bleeds through thin paper, lies a war that never ended. Beyond the ruins and monuments, there are whispers of submarines without ports, convoys erased from memory, and bunkers locked in ice that breathe like living tombs. This is not the war taught in classrooms, but the one buried in silence, where truth was smothered long before the guns grew quiet. In the final days of the Second World War, as Allied bombers reduced Berlin to rubble and Adolf Hitler prepared for his suicide in the Führerbunker, a very different story was unfolding thousands of miles away across the Atlantic. It began with a sighting in the bitter winter of 1945 on the remote Atlantic coast of Argentina. Fishermen operating near Puerto Madryn reported a grey silhouette surfacing in the moonlight. A long steel hull, barnacled and scarred, bearing the unmistakable outline of a Type WWII U-boot. The men swore it was no merchant ship. The vessel surfaced only briefly, its crew operating in complete silence before slipping beneath the waves again. The report was passed quietly to Argentine naval authorities, but it never appeared in any Kriegsmarine records. It was as if the submarine had materialized from nowhere, executed its orders, and vanished without a trace. The mystery became more compelling in July 1945, when two German U-boats, U-530 and U-977, surrendered in Mar del Plata months after Germany's capitulation. Their presence was a shock. Why were Kriegsmarine submarines surfacing in South America weeks after the Reich had ceased to exist? U-530's commander, Otto Wehrmuth, offered little explanation beyond vague statements about delayed orders. U-977's captain, Heinz Schäfer, would later publish his memoir, insisting his voyage was a desperate escape, not a mission. But Argentine intelligence believed otherwise. Witnesses insisted another U-boat, larger than both, had been seen surfacing further south along Patagonia's coast. This one never formally surrendered. Recently declassified OSS memoranda shed further light. In a cable dated 17th May 1945, Field Officer William Donovan noted persistent rumors of submarine activity off the Patagonian coast, possibly connected to transfer of personnel or material of exceptional importance. Another intercepted, Enigma message, partially decrypted at Bletchley Park in April 1945, contained the phrase Project Seeschlange, Project Sea Serpent. The message, originating from Flensburg, was addressed not to a German naval command, but to an obscure Reichspost office in Hamburg, suggesting civilian cover for a naval operation. The cable ended abruptly, its last lines corrupted by interference. South. American archives hint at a wider network. During the war, thousands of German expatriates settled in Argentina, Paraguay, and Chile, forming tight-knit communities often loyal to Berlin. In Patagonia, sprawling estancias owned by German families provided secluded safe havens. One OSS field report from 1946 described an isolated ranch near Bariloche, where crates marked with industrial codes inconsistent with local production were delivered under guard. Locals whispered that former SS men were hiding in the Andes, awaiting new orders. What then was the cargo of the missing submarine? Argentine journalist Eduardo Cardenas, writing in 1977, claimed to have obtained testimonies of dock workers in Puerto Deseado who remembered unusual crates being unloaded under Argentine naval supervision. According to their accounts, the crates bore stenciled markings not of the Kriegsmarine, but of Ahnenerbe, the SS's pseudo-scientific research bureau. The men were silenced quickly. One later disappeared after speaking to foreign press. The Argentine Navy refused to comment, insisting no such deliveries had taken place. The trail resurfaced decades later, in 1978, when divers exploring the Golfo Nuevo discovered the rusting remains of a steel structure buried beneath sand and kelp. Photographs taken before Argentine authorities sealed the site showed a conning tower plate consistent with the Type WWII class. Unlike U-530 or U-977, this wreck had no corresponding entry in Kriegsmarine loss records. Within days, the site was declared off limits and all artifacts were confiscated. Witnesses claimed Argentine military trucks removed the materials to an unknown destination inland. British MI6 files, declassified only in the late 1990s, reveal London's deep concern. A memorandum dated 23 August 1945, marked Most Secret, warned possibility of submarine transport of sensitive materiel, including nuclear-related components to Argentina, cannot be excluded. Recommend suppression of reports to avoid public speculation. The phrasing is telling. By 1945, both Allied and Axis powers were racing for control of atomic technology. Documents recovered from Peenemünde and Oranienburg indicated German scientists had experimented with uranium enrichment, though the true progress of their efforts remains contested. A Type Moying C-40 submarine, with its extended range and cargo capacity, would have been an ideal vessel for transporting dismantled equipment or personnel linked to these programs. Compounding the mystery, several Red Cross passports were later found to have been forged in Geneva under false identities, bearing the names of individuals later identified as former SS scientists. These men surfaced in Argentina during the late 1940s, often under assumed professions as engineers or doctors. Their pasts were quietly ignored by sympathetic officials within Juan Perón's government. One name, however, appears in both OSS and MI6 files: Dr. Friedrich Bergmann, an engineer associated with advanced naval propulsion research. Bergmann vanished from Germany in April 1945. By 1947, he was living under a false identity near Bariloche, reportedly visited by other German émigrés. His connection to the missing U-boat remains speculative, but cannot be dismissed. For decades, governments maintained silence. Official Kriegsmarine or diaries list U-530 and U-977 as the only submarines to have reached Argentina. The third, unnamed U-boat was dismissed as rumor. Yet fishermen still speak of the night they saw the steel beast rise from the sea, only to vanish forever beneath the Patagonian waves. In declassified CIA files from 1958, an analyst noted, "Unconfirmed but persistent evidence suggests transfer of high-value material to Argentina via submarine. Subject remains politically sensitive. Recommend continued suppression." The question remains unanswered. What was delivered to Patagonia in 1945, and why has its existence been erased from official history? Was it gold, plundered art, or something more dangerous, nuclear components, secret research, or high-ranking personnel whose capture would have reshaped post-war justice? The silence of archives, the gaps in naval records, and the sealed wreck in Golfo Nuevo suggest the truth was not simply forgotten. It was buried. Nearly 80 years later, the Patagonian coast still hides its secrets. The tide erases footprints, the sand buries wreckage, and the waves close quickly after the steel hulls vanish beneath them. But in scattered files, coded, telegrams, and whispered testimonies, fragments of a hidden exodus remain, evidence of a Reich that may have died in Berlin, but whose shadow lingered in the cold waters of the South Atlantic. In the late months of 1944, as Europe stood poised on the edge of collapse, an incident occurred in the Norwegian Sea that remains absent from official naval records, but surfaces in fragments of classified memoranda and survivor testimonies. It involved 3 Liberty ships, standard American-built cargo vessels, assigned to the Arctic convoys that supplied the Soviet Union under the Lend-Lease program. Designated as part of an unnumbered special convoy, these ships departed Murmansk in November, carrying what Soviet archives later revealed to be seized German material from northern Germany and Poland. Among the cargo were dismantled assemblies recovered from Peenemünde and Blizna, fragments of V-2 ballistic missiles, gyroscopic guidance units, and crates marked with the cryptic abbreviation MWA, believed to reference Mittelwerk Außenlager, the underground factory where slave labor had built the weapons. None of the ships ever reached Scotland. No distress calls were received. No wreckage was officially reported. Their names and hull numbers were struck from Allied manifests as if they had never sailed. The first hint of their existence reappeared decades later when Soviet naval records declassified in the 1990s mentioned a joint Anglo-American-Soviet transfer, Murmansk to Scapa Flow, November 1944. The documents, written in cold, bureaucratic language, described an operation code-named Gavanovi Kod, Harbormaster. One report noted the mission's strategic importance: delivery of captured fascist rocket technology for evaluation by combined Allied forces. The convoy had been protected by two destroyer escorts, HMS Zambezi and USS Rouse, both of which returned to port reporting no contact, no survivors. Their logs were immediately sealed by the Admiralty. Theories of what happened vary, but a partially declassified OSS memorandum dated 2 December 1944 stated, "Intelligence indicates severe loss in Norwegian Sea. Special cargo en route from Murmansk presumed destroyed. Circumstances of disappearance remain unexplained. No SOS recorded, suggesting sudden catastrophic event." The tone of the report is striking for its lack of military precision. It reads more like an after-action note written in haste and concealed in archives. Attached was a single blurred aerial photograph, taken by RAF reconnaissance over the Barents Sea. The image shows what appear to be large surface disturbances, circular, unnatural ripples, spread across a 2-mile span of ocean. No vessels are visible. Norwegian resistance sources, who communicated with the British SOE via clandestine radio sets, reported a strange phenomenon in the same week. A fisherman near Andøya claimed to see a flying object that made no sound but left a wake across the water's surface as it passed low over the convoy route. His description, a dark triangle with sharp edges, was dismissed at the time as confusion or fear. Yet the story was preserved in a resistance report dated 23 November 1944, intercepted by MI6 and later buried under the category anomalous sightings. The British War Office never acknowledged its existence. What gives credence to the account is a later discovery. In 1951, a Soviet salvage team operating near Bear Island reportedly recovered fragments of unusual alloy consistent with V2 structural components. Soviet engineers wrote in an internal memo, "Material highly valuable. Recovery suggests Allied loss of transport vessel. Incident to remain secret to avoid Anglo-American embarrassment." No public record of the salvage exists, but cross-references in KGB archives confirm such fragments were indeed examined at the Bauman Technical Institute in Moscow in the early 1950s. If the convoy was deliberately erased from history, the question remains, why? Some historians argue it was sabotage. The Germans still maintained U-boat wolfpacks in the Norwegian Sea during late 1944, though by then their capacity for coordinated attacks was diminished. Yet no Allied reports of U-boat contacts exist for the relevant dates, and no German U-boat claims correspond with 3 simultaneous sinkings. Others point to friendly fire or deliberate scuttling. A top-secret US Navy file labeled Harbormaster Special Assets states boldly, "Convoy, classified as expendable." The line, though brief, implies that either the ships or their cargo were considered dangerous enough that their loss would be tolerated, or perhaps orchestrated. The possibility of technological suppression cannot be dismissed. Allied powers were deeply divided over how to exploit captured German science. Operation Paperclip in the United States and Operation Osoaviakim in the Soviet Union both aggressively sought German experts, often in violation of prior agreements. If the Harbormaster convoy was transporting sensitive V2 or guidance technology, it may have been eliminated to prevent it from falling into rival hands. One MI6 annotation, handwritten in the margin of a 1945 file, reads simply, "Better lost than shared." The families of the men aboard the 3 ships never received clear answers. Casualty telegrams listed their relatives as missing, presumed lost in operations. No battle honors were awarded, and no memorials erected. For decades, the ships themselves were absent from naval registers. Their names appeared only in incomplete drafts of convoy lists unearthed in Admiralty archives in the 1970s, later redacted before publication. Maritime historians who pressed for clarity were told the records had been destroyed in peacetime rationalization efforts. In 2009, an expedition sponsored by a Norwegian maritime museum attempted sonar mapping of the area north of the Lofoten, islands where the ships were last logged. They reported detecting 3 anomalous shapes on the seabed, consistent in size and dimension with Liberty hulls. The team was denied permits to pursue further dives, the official explanation citing environmental and navigational safety concerns. Their sonar scans, however, leaked online, showing silhouettes of cargo ships resting upright at depths of nearly 300 meters. The wrecks have not been visited since. If the Harbormaster convoy did indeed vanish without a trace, then its loss represents not only a human tragedy, but also an intentional erasure of history. A Soviet officer writing in 1946 summarized it bluntly. 3 ships departed, none arrived, their mission erased from records, their cargo absorbed into silence. Whether destroyed by enemy action, sacrificed in geopolitical maneuvering, or consumed by something stranger still, the ships of Operation Harbormaster remain the lost convoy of World War II, a chapter withheld from both public memory and the official record, locked in the shadows of secrecy that defined the Cold War. To come. Among the vast archives of the Central Intelligence Agency, there exists a file once marked Eyes Only Restricted Distribution. Its subject line reads simply, Oranienburg. The town, 20 kilometers north of Berlin, was the site of one of Nazi Germany's most secretive industrial complexes. Official history recalls it as the home of the Oranienburg uranium plant. Bombed by the US 8th Air Force in March 1945 during a raid that reduced much of the facility to ruins. Yet the classified Oranienburg Files, declassified in fragments, after 1992, reveal a far darker and less acknowledged story, one involving vanished scientists, shadow laboratories, and a struggle between Allied and Soviet powers for the atomic future. The files begin with translated Soviet memoranda from May 1945. The Red Army's 47th Army had advanced into Oranienburg as part of the larger Berlin operation, seizing what remained of the Auergesellschaft facility. According to an NKVD report stamped Top Secret, Directorate S, Soviet troops cordoned off the ruins and transported tons of contaminated debris eastward under armed guard. The files state bluntly, recovered from Oranienburg 250 kilograms of uranium oxide, processing apparatus incomplete, records largely destroyed by Anglo-American airstrike. Yet appended notes raise questions. One entry mentions inexplicable removal of certain centrifuge assemblies prior to our arrival. Another observes documents missing, likely removed by Anglo-American teams operating covertly before Soviet entry. These discrepancies would form the basis of a silent intelligence war in the years to come. The CIA collection contains Allied references to Operation Alsos, the American mission to capture German nuclear technology. Most public accounts emphasize the seizure of scientists in southern Germany, such as Werner Heisenberg and Otto Hahn. What is less discussed is that Alsos operatives under Colonel Boris Pasch had been active in Berlin's northern outskirts weeks before the Soviets secured Oranienburg. A British intelligence note dated 20th April 1945 records temporary detachment operating in vicinity of Oranienburg under commercial cover. The note does not specify their purpose. The Oranienburg files, however, suggest their task was not observation, but removal. A burned fragment of an inventory sheet, translated from German and recovered by Alsos, lists Uranmaschinenbau, Drahtzahlgerät, Typ Zarya 4. The term Zarya 4 appears repeatedly in both Soviet and American annotations, though no definitive explanation exists. Equally disturbing are references to missing personnel. Several scientists associated with the Auer plant, including Dr. Kurt Diebner and Dr. Nicholas Riehl, were known to have worked on uranium processing. Riehl was eventually taken to the Soviet Union under Operation Osoaviakhim in 1946, where he contributed to the Soviet atomic program. But NKVD documents in the Oranienburg files list additional names engineers, and technicians not accounted for in any post-war tribunal or academic roster. Their fate is summarized in a chilling line from an August 1945 NKVD interrogation report. Subject transferred to special unit, location withheld. Western intelligence analysts speculated that these men were forced into secret Soviet research camps in the Urals, never to resurface. The British, too, had their own reasons to obscure events. A War Office memorandum from 1946, declassified, only in 2004, admits that certain exchanges of personnel and knowledge were facilitated with Soviet authorities in the interest of maintaining alliance cohesion. In plain terms, scientists were bartered for silence, their forced transfer ignored in exchange for Soviet cooperation elsewhere. It was an uncomfortable truth in the early Cold War, one that neither London nor Washington wanted exposed to public scrutiny. The Oranienburg Files became the repository for such compromising documents, notes too sensitive to destroy, too dangerous to release. Perhaps the most striking artifact in the collection is a Luftwaffe map, badly scorched, annotated. In both German and Cyrillic script, it depicts the Baltic coastline near the island of Rügen, with several inland locations marked with red triangles. A CIA analyst in 1957 attached the following note: cross-referencing indicates possible subterranean structures associated with Uran project. Soviet excavation teams active in these regions post-1945. Access currently restricted by East German authorities. The implication is that Oranienburg was not merely a processing plant, but the hub of a larger network of facilities extending into underground shafts, possibly intended for reactor experiments or weapons research. To this day, those shafts remain sealed, their existence unacknowledged by both German and Russian officials. The Oranienburg Files also contain disturbing medical notations. A translated Soviet field report from June 1945 describes transfer of 48 prisoners from Sachsenhausen camp to assist in materials handling. The report states bluntly, 27 died within weeks, cause radiation sickness. Their bodies were buried in unmarked graves near Klinkerwerk, the brickwork subcamp of Sachsenhausen. No official memorial exists for them, and their role in handling radioactive substances at Oranienburg was suppressed after the war, erased from survivor testimonies and public history alike. Only the clinical notes in the archives preserve the evidence of their suffering. The suppression of the Oranienburg story was not accidental. Throughout the 1950s, as the nuclear arms race escalated, both Washington and Moscow had incentives to conceal how deeply they had relied on German science and how brutally they had secured it. A CIA internal memo from 1961, written at the height of Cold War paranoia, instructs analysts: no public reference to Oranienburg or related Zarya 4 material. Narrative must remain. German atomic project disorganized, unsuccessful, no significant discoveries seized. The truth was far murkier and far more dangerous to admit. By acknowledging that substantial uranium processing had occurred and that both superpowers had scavenged and suppressed its evidence, they risked revealing the extent to which post-war atomic progress was built on stolen labor, coerced science, and political deceit. Even after the files were partially released in 1992, crucial pages remained redacted. Handwritten annotations by unknown operatives appear in margins. Cryptic phrases such as "tested beneath the Baltic coast, not in Thuringia," and "second reactor assembly, status unresolved." The handwriting has never been matched to any known officer, though some intelligence historians believe it belonged to a senior analyst in the CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence. The pages suggest that fragments of a reactor, possibly assembled with uranium from Oranienburg, were indeed tested in secret, whether by the Germans before 1945 or by the Soviets afterward, is unclear. What remains is a story of silence. Oranienburg today is a commuter town, its wartime ruins overgrown or repurposed. Few visitors realize they walk above ground that once held the foundations of Germany's atomic hopes, or that beneath the soil lay graves of prisoners sacrificed to science. The archives tell of missing men, missing machines, and missing truth. They tell of a technology that slipped through the cracks of war, claimed not by one victor but by all, each concealing their theft from the others. The Oranienburg Files were never meant for public eyes, and even now, decades later, they remain incomplete, a reminder of how easily history can be rewritten, not by lies alone, but by silence and omission. Burma, 1944. While much of the world's attention was fixed on the crumbling Reich in Europe, another struggle, murkier and more deeply buried in archives, was unfolding in the dense jungles of Southeast Asia. Official accounts describe the Allied campaign as a clash between Japanese forces of the 15th Army and conventional British and American units. Yet behind the familiar battles of Imphal and Kohima ran an invisible war fought by shadow organizations. The American OSS Detachment 101, the British Special Operations Executives Force 136, and assorted irregulars whose very existence was later struck from official rosters. Classified memoranda and fragmentary testimonies suggest that Burma was not only a battlefield against Japan, but a contested zone where allies spied on allies, where technology changed hands under the cover of night, and where entire platoons vanished without a trace. OSS Detachment 101, operating out of Nazira in Assam, specialized in guerrilla warfare, sabotage, and intelligence collection. Their network of Kachin tribesmen wreaked havoc on Japanese supply lines, cutting telegraph wires, ambushing patrols, and guiding US bombers to hidden depots. At the same time, British Force 136, headquartered in Ceylon but with forward bases along the Chindwin River, was pursuing similar missions. Though nominally allied, declassified War Office communications reveal a persistent rivalry. A telegram dated 12th of February 1944, stamped "Most Secret," warned London. American OSS operating without consultation. Intercepted communications suggest deliberate obstruction of Force 136 supply drops. Recommend diplomatic intervention. The Americans, for their part, accused the British of hoarding intelligence and negotiating independently with local insurgent groups. Hidden within this rivalry lay an even stranger thread. Burmese villagers near Myitkyina recounted seeing parachutists descend at night, their chutes black against the moon, uniforms unmarked by insignia. They spoke no English, no Japanese, and offered no explanation before vanishing into the tree line. An OSS after-action report dated 3rd of July 1944 contains an enigmatic line. Encountered unidentified unit operating with advanced equipment, radio beacons not of Allied issue, advised to avoid further contact. That line was later crossed out in red pencil, the page marked "Withdrawn from circulation." Force 136 records contain similar references, describing shadow operators who appeared at key moments of the campaign, disrupting both Japanese movements and Allied planning. One theory emerges from a set of intercepted Japanese documents recovered after the war. Among them was a technical brief outlining experiments with radio-guided bombs, crude prototypes intended for naval use. The documents, captured near Rangoon in 1945, contain diagrams that resemble the German Fritz X glide bomb. How such technology reached Burma remains unexplained. A marginal note by an OSS analyst speculates possibility of Axis transfer via clandestine flights from Andaman Islands. More troubling is a British Force 136 file, never intended for public release, that describes a deliberate agreement between certain Allied operatives and Japanese officers. In exchange for captured components and technical data, Japanese supply flights along select routes were deliberately left unmolested. The file's codename was Eagle's Nest Burma. Entire sections are redacted, but the implication is clear. Shadow negotiations were taking place even as battles raged. Survivors provide fragmentary testimony. A retired Kachin fighter, interviewed in 1971, recalled guiding American officers through mountain passes when they stumbled on a cache of crates marked with Japanese characters. Inside were unfamiliar instruments, metal boxes with glass eyes, in his words, later removed by the Americans under extreme secrecy. He swore the officers were terrified, warning the Kachin to speak of it to no one. In another testimony, a British radio operator claimed that on multiple nights in 1944, his unit was ordered to transmit decoy signals, drawing Japanese bombers toward empty jungle clearings, while real convoys moved elsewhere. He later learned the decoy zones corresponded with sites of clandestine parachute drops, possibly connected to those unmarked soldiers who appeared without explanation. Post-war tribunals never mentioned these irregulars. The Burma campaign was remembered for its brutality, its disease, and the heroism of conventional units. But in War Office document WO-203-5704, classified until 1989, there appears a chilling annex. It lists British servicemen officially declared killed in action during jungle operations. But next to several names is a handwritten note. Removed from record, see Eagle's Nest, Burma. No further explanation is given. Their units simply ceased to exist on paper. The Americans, too, buried their tracks. OSS files transferred to the CIA contain redacted references to Burma irregular detachments struck from official order of battle. A 1947 CIA assessment concluded, details of operations in northern Burma remain fragmentary. Probability high that sensitive exchanges with enemy forces were sanctioned in field without higher approval. Recommend indefinite suppression. Such language betrays a fear not of enemy action, but of exposure. For both nations, acknowledging that Allied operatives may have traded with Japanese officers, or that experimental technology changed hands under clandestine agreements, would have undermined the moral narrative of the war. The Shadow War left physical traces nonetheless. In 1964, Burmese villagers unearthed corroded metal fragments in a clearing outside Myitkyina. Photographs sent to Rangoon University show what appear to be components of an airframe, thin alloy sheeting riveted with unusual precision. The fragments disappeared into military custody, never displayed or studied. Rumors persist that similar finds were made along the old supply routes, often confiscated by intelligence services before they reach civilian hands. Today, the story of Burma's invisible war exists only in whispers and redacted files. It is a history of double dealings, erased missions, and silent disappearances. It is also a reminder that the Second World War was not fought only in open battles, but in the shadows where allies distrusted each other as much as the enemy, and where men without insignia carried orders no one would ever acknowledge. As one Force 136 officer wrote in a private letter never intended for publication, Burma was not a war, it was a game of ghosts. We fought the Japanese, but we also fought ourselves, and in the end, we erased the very men who fought it. In the summer of 1952, a Norwegian geological survey team landed on the western coast of Spitzbergen, part of the Svalbard archipelago, to conduct a routine mapping of permafrost formations. What they found, half buried in glacial ice, was not a natural formation but reinforced concrete. The structure, at first mistaken for a Cold War-era Soviet outpost, was later revealed to be German in origin. Stenciled across rusting steel crates within the bunker was a single word: Reichspost. Alongside the crates lay detailed maps of North Atlantic shipping lanes and fragments of unfamiliar mechanical assemblies, parts resembling gyroscopic stabilizers, wiring harnesses, and propulsion components. The discovery, initially reported in a quiet geological bulletin, was quickly classified by NATO and scrubbed from public record. The Spitzbergen bunker has since become one of the least acknowledged mysteries of the post-war Arctic. Norwegian archives contain only a handful of references. A Ministry of Defense memorandum from September 1952 describes the site as a reinforced facility of German wartime construction, evidently supplied by Kriegsmarine assets. The document notes the interior bore signs of occupation, bunk beds, supply tins, field stoves, but also equipment inconsistent with standard field installations. One inventory lists navigation assemblies, large, unknown application. Photographs taken before the site was sealed show a cylindrical object, roughly 2 meters in length, marked with a faded swastika, Within weeks, all physical evidence was removed to Oslo under NATO supervision. Civilian surveyors were sworn to secrecy under threat of prosecution. Declassified KGB intercepts suggest Moscow was aware of the find almost immediately. A 1953 cable from Murmansk to Moscow describes American and Norwegian forces secure German polar installation, believed linked to missile or atomic project. The cable references Project Uran, a rumored Nazi program to establish launch stations in remote northern latitudes. The Soviets feared that such outposts could have been intended for long-range strikes against Allied shipping, or even north. American cities. A follow-up report warned, presence of Reichspost containers indicates involvement of high-level logistics network, suggesting orders originated from Reichspost Ministerium under Obergruppenführer Ohnesorge. This is significant, for Wilhelm Ohnesorge, Hitler's postmaster general, oversaw not only communications but clandestine technology projects, many of which vanished without trace in 1945. The American files, though sparse, contain one extraordinary detail. A US Air Force engineering officer stationed at Keflavik, Iceland, photographed an intact generator recovered from the Spitzbergen site before it was flown out under heavy guard. The generator bore the Reichsadler insignia, but also a serial code not found in any surviving Wehrmacht production catalogue. The photographs, filed under Arctic Technical Debriefing 1952, disappeared from archives within a decade. Only low-resolution contact prints survived in a private collection, leaked in the 1980s. Analysts who reviewed the images noted design similarities to experimental power units associated with V2 launch sites in Peenemünde. Norwegian sources provide further, though fragmentary, testimony. In 1978, a retired naval officer gave a closed interview in which he recalled escorting 2 American vessels into Tromsø shortly after the bunker's discovery. Their cargo, unloaded at night under heavy security, included several elongated crates. The officer was told the shipment contained scrap machinery, yet he insisted the crates were handled with unusual caution. His testimony was never officially corroborated, but a classified Norwegian Defence Staff note from 1979 admits residual materials from Spitzbergen site transferred to American custody for technical evaluation. What then was the purpose of the bunker? Wartime German naval records, though incomplete, contain hints. U-boat traffic logs from 1944 refer cryptically to Basis Nordpol, a supply station whose coordinates remain classified. Several Type 9 submarines were noted to have disappeared in Arctic waters, presumed sunk, yet the possibility arises that some were diverted to clandestine construction projects, carrying prefabricated sections of reinforced concrete and specialized equipment. Allied intelligence had long suspected German interest in Arctic bases. Rumors circulated of weather stations and listening posts hidden in Greenland and Franz Josef Land. Spitzbergen, positioned astride key convoy routes to Murmansk, would have been a logical site for something far larger, a forward base for reconnaissance or missile deployment. The most disturbing element of the Spitzbergen discovery lies not in what was found, but in what was concealed. A NATO briefing from 1954, declassified in fragments, concludes, recovered apparatus indicates advanced research application beyond weather or communications. Technical specifics remain restricted. The wording suggests that the components may have been related to guidance systems, perhaps intended for long-range rockets. German documents captured at the end of the war confirm that work had begun on extending the V2's range to intercontinental distances. Whether Spitzbergen represented a staging ground for such ambitions cannot be proven, yet the evidence aligns too closely to dismiss. Local law preserves echoes of the incident. Hunters on Spitzbergen spoke of hearing metallic reverberations beneath the ice long before the official discovery, as if machinery lay buried. Some claimed to see faint plumes rising from snow-covered vents in winters as late as 1947, though no patrols were officially dispatched. The permafrost sealed over the site, preserving it until the geological team stumbled upon it by chance. By the time the Cold War intensified, the bunker had become a strategic liability, one better hidden than acknowledged. For the Americans, It was a chance to seize German technology. For the Norwegians, a matter of sovereignty. For the Soviets, an enduring reminder that Nazi science may have reached further north than anyone admitted. Today, no trace of the bunker remains. The site is officially listed as a geological anomaly, its coordinates omitted from maps. Norwegian government spokesmen deny all knowledge. The crates, the generator, the Reichspost markings, all have disappeared into sealed archives. The Soviet intercepts, the US Air Force photographs, the Norwegian testimonies exist only as fragments, each pointing toward a truth never officially acknowledged. The permafrost keeps its silence. In the end, the Spitzbergen bunker embodies the larger problem of World War II's aftermath, the blurred boundary between history and suppression. Was it merely a weather station, as some later claimed, or a forward base for a Reich that dreamed of polar missile fields? The evidence suggests something more than routine logistics, something so sensitive that three superpowers colluded to erase it. The silence, the sealed archives, and the vanishing photographs form their own testimony. Beneath the Arctic ice, in concrete and steel, lies a story frozen not just by nature, but by design. Even now, beneath oceans, jungles, and frozen earth, fragments of that silence remain. Rusted steel, scorched maps, names crossed out in red ink. They wait like phantoms, reminders that victory was never clean, and that secrets can outlive empires. Perhaps the deepest scars of war are not carved in battlefields, but in the histories no one dares to write. And in those sealed vaults of memory, the war's shadow still lingers, whispering to those who choose to listen.